Hello, everyone. Welcome to AAC in the Cloud. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about AAC and literacy, specifically structured phonics program called UFLI. Let me share my screen with you. While I open that up, my name is Kate Ahern. I am a special education teacher who has focused on AAC users for most of my career. And I have been working for the past several years since the start of COVID, running an online homeschool cooperative. So I have anywhere from 12 to 17 students who are tuitioned to be with me full day. In the morning, we do literacy in the UFLI program, which I'm going to talk to you a lot about. And in the afternoon, also in the morning, we do math. In the afternoon, we do some reading experiences that are shared reading, where I read aloud and we work on comprehension and language and vocab. We do some writing activities, sometimes writing with the alphabet, sometimes writing with AAC for all different purposes. And we have an AAC skills class. In addition, we have a young adult social group. We frequently offer, not frequently, but periodically, we offer science classes or drama classes or cooking classes. And once a week, we do cook in the afternoons on Fridays. So it's a pretty comprehensive program, but it is a homeschool, so parents are in charge of everything for their learner at home. But they do attend classes with me, and then parents can choose to augment that any way they want. We all keep in really close touch. We've formed a close community, and that's where I've been using UFLI, which is the program, the comprehensive phonics program we're going to talk about. So my interest in literacy and learning has been lifelong. But recently, in the past several years, I think being home a lot with COVID, I did a lot of reading on the science, a lot of learning and reading on the science of reading. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. And the more I learned, the more I wondered why I wasn't doing this with my students. Coincidentally, I was educated in my college program in the mid to late 90s, taught what we now call a science of reading program. So I was trained to teach reading using these research-based, robust methodologies of explicit and systematic instruction to learn to read. But I heard from so many people, and there was this overwhelming feeling early in my career that my kids, the kids who were nonverbal, who may or may not have had intellectual disabilities, but were always assumed to have them, my kids couldn't do that. And then it became more, they could do that, but it had to be very adapted. And now what I'm finding is they can do this. They can absolutely use a structured literacy program, focusing on structured and systematic phonics, adapting only for access and not for content. And that's what I'd like to tell you about. Some of the successes that we're seeing, the program UFLI that we're using, how I'm adapting UFLI. So if any of you want to try that at home, you can. Or if you want to try it with your class, you can. I make everything I adapt free for other people. So if you want to get the UFLI manual, look it over, try to use it with your students, all of the slideshows that go with each lesson, I've adapted and I share. So you can download those and change them for your students. I'm really trying to share the wealth here because we are seeing such success. I'm sure you've all heard this quote, no child is too anything to be able to read and write. And I have to admit that, well, I may believe that in college. I went through a short period of time after college where, you know, from what I saw from people who've been in the field longer than I, my students weren't expected to learn to read and write. But now I know better. I wish I could go back to those students. The other thing that's vitally important is literacy is a human right. The right to be taught how to read is being more and more being confirmed in American society and in other places, that it is the job of a school system to teach somebody how to read and write, and it is a basic human right. If you look back on the history of literacy, especially around people of color, denying the ability to become literate was a huge part of the subjectation of people, and a massive part of keeping people of color from voting and people of color from having access to knowledge. The same is true for women over in history. Women not being educated, not being taught to read and write was a way to keep them subjugated and to prevent them from accessing knowledge. And then when we think about our students as a protected class of people, of disabled people, you have to start to think about, is our refusal to truly teach literacy and to ensure our students are literate, is that part of a subjectation of people and preventing them from having knowledge, and therefore fighting for their rights as human beings? So let's think a little bit more about why we do literacy. First of all, the most expansive AAC system, no matter what system you use, might offer 4,000 to 10,000 words. A lot of the systems that offer more words count each individual change in a word. So ran, run, will run, they count those all as separate words. So that makes it seem like there's a lot more words. There might be a couple programs. I think the new ProLoco might have more words, but generally no more than 4,000 to 10,000 words. But there are over 100,000 words in active use in the English language. And of course, new words are being added to active use every day. We create language as we go. So there are new words that that kids will encounter, possibly that we never encountered before. The only way to truly say anything you want is to be able to spell. Not every word is going to be in an AAC system. The only way to say exactly what you want is to be able to spell it. Reading also adds a leisure activity. One thing we hear a lot around individuals who have complex disabilities is they don't have many leisure activities. But if you can read, you have leisure activity. And of course, literacy is a basic human right. So some of the things that we all need to think about are, first of all, AAC users likely learn to read and write the same way everybody else does. The difference is they can't always say the sounds with their mouths. So the issue is more, how do we assess their gaining of reading knowledge without their ability to speak? But there's always been this strange assumption that if you can't speak, you can't read. And so we give up. And I think that really comes down to that we think if we can't assess, then a child can't learn. But that's not true. We all know that. We all know that people learn everything every day. They learn things every day that haven't been assessed, and they still learn them. So the evidence-based and research-based information about reading instruction for typical learners is also important to AAC users. You know, there's lots of knowledge out there around how the brain learns how to read. And if we ignore that because we think our kids are somehow the exception, then we're doing them a disservice. Flip that paradigm on its head. Unless there's evidence that this doesn't work for AAC users, then assume they're part of the all, right? My students are part of the all. All kids learn better to read using systematic, explicit reading programs. My kids are part of the all. We should all keep in mind that reading is not a natural or hardwired process like languages. For kids who are verbal, they developed language verbally naturally. We model it for them orally, we talk to them, but we never have to sit them down and explicitly teach everything. They develop it naturally. That's not how reading works. Evolutionary wise, we aren't hardwired through evolution to be able to read and write the way that we are hardwired to be able to communicate with language. So we have to think about the explicit teaching of reading and writing. We'll often hear about reading to a child and how essential that is, and it is. Reading to babies, infants from the moment they're born is essential, but it's not enough. Learning to read starts on a parent's lap, but being read to isn't enough. It isn't everything. Also, we need to think of that there should be about 2 hours a day of literacy instruction for every AAC user, and that's the same amount as for typical kids learning how to read. It doesn't mean you sit down and you do 2 hours of instruction. It means that over the course of the day, several times a day, different parts of literacy are worked on, adding up to about 2 hours a day, some days more, some days less. And it needs to be the same for our kids. And we lose so much time on transitions and adults talking to each other and therapies. The therapies are so valuable on toileting, diapering, and feeding, which can take up a lot of time, on healthcare issues that need to happen during the day, on keeping kids regulated sensory-wise and emotion-wise. It might be hard to find the 2 hours, but it's so vital. Another thing to think about are that sight word programs can be a supportive part of a reading program. So UFLI, the program we're going to talk about, does spend some time on what they call heart words, which is sight words where irregular words are taught. But a lot of times the sight words being taught are actually decodable. If you know your letters and sounds, you can read them. You don't need to memorize them. But to just have sight words, that's not true reading and instruction. So this would be like EdMark and PCI sight words. Whenever I go to an IEP meeting and they say, oh, we're using EdMark or PCI, that's not reading. You'll never get beyond a second grade level using those programs. And you can never apply what you've learned to a new word you've never seen. You either know a word or you don't know a word. And there's no way you don't learn to decode. How far a learner will move towards literacy is impossible to know. But what we do know is kids will not become literate if we don't give them the same intensive, high quality instruction as their peers. So, people will say, well, they're never going to get further than a first grade level, or they're never going to get, they'll never get beyond just reading basic words. Well, we don't know that. We don't have any proof that where the ceiling is on any human being, disabled or not. But we do know that if we don't use explicit reading instruction for typical kids, then about 40% of them won't learn how to read well. There's a movie called Right to Read. It's a documentary. It's actually free today, Juneteenth, but by the time you see this, it will no longer be free. But Right to Read goes through looking at how systematic phonics instruction is not part of literacy in some districts and how that impacts people of color. And I strongly recommend people reading it or watching it. I also recommend the podcast Sold a Story, which talks even more about how Americans were sort of tricked into these programs that don't actually teach reading. And they were called things like whole language or balanced literacy, 4 blocks, which had some components of a good literacy program, but not the systematic, explicit instruction that is needed. And then, of course, this myth that students have to be able to speak to read, which just isn't true. So let's talk about science of reading. What do I mean when I say that? So science of reading isn't a curriculum, it's an idea. It's a body of research focusing on how the brain learns how to read, where the different parts of the brain that are needed to read activate first and next, and how they connect, and the most effective strategies to teach reading. It's multidisciplinary. It uses information from developmental psychology, educational psychology, cognitive science, neuroscience. The studies are across many fields to look at what scientifically is proven to work to teach kids to read and adults to read. The research stems from many languages and many cultures. There are obviously differences between more pictographic languages that don't use the alphabet and languages that use an alphabet, but still the research is there for both. It also eschews these pseudo-scientific approaches like whole language. Whole language was basically the belief that if you read books to kids, that they would naturally learn how to read. If you gave them books like, I see a dog, I see a cat, I see a monkey, and there was, they would memorize I see a, and then look at the picture and say monkey, cat, dog. Turns out you don't learn to read that way. Balanced literacy, which was supposed to add some phonics to the whole language approach, but it didn't add explicit systematic phonics. And the idea of 3-cueing, which is an idea that if you don't know a word, you should guess. And that is the worst possible way to figure out a word, is to guess. They recommend guessing from the picture. They recommend guessing from the first letter. They recommend guessing from if the word you're thinking of makes sense. What they don't recommend is looking at the letters and decoding the word. And looking at the letters and decoding the word is essential. It's the only true way to read. 3-cueing makes it look like you can read when you can't. So I've already said this, but you'll hear that there's no research on AAC users in the science of reading. However, the research on how the brain learns to read works across age, location, race, social class, and more. Maybe there are some things within certain disabilities that make it different. We know that some students, like students with Down syndrome, do really well with a visual-based system. We know other students with Williams syndrome, do really, really well with an auditorily based program. But all of that is still within the research of science of reading. So don't let this argument turn you away from following a science of reading belief system. Science of reading is also not a curriculum. You don't buy a science of reading curriculum. The term is being co-opted and used to advertise reading programs, which are not, there should be a T there, which are not science of reading aligned. So just because something says it's science of reading aligned doesn't mean it is. You need to understand science of reading enough to make a determination if the things they're recommending in the program do align with the science. And remember, science changes. So what I believe today, there could be a breakthrough next week, some big study that says, you know what, we said to do it this way. Don't do it this other way. So we have to stay current with our research. So there are 5 elements of reading success. These are the 5 things that the National Reading Panel reported as being the key to being able to read well. And this was back in 2000. So this is, some time ago. I know if you're my age, you think 2000 was like last week, but really it was 23 years ago. So this research has been around for a long time. So the 5 things are phonemic awareness, phonics, comprehension, fluency, and vocabulary. So what does that mean? So phonemic awareness is the ability to hear individual sounds, or which are called phonemes, in words. And then it's the ability to manipulate those phonemes within words. So it's asking kids to think of the word bat. Take off the last sound, ba. Put a G on the end, bag. Or it's, think of the word bat. Switch the first letter and the last letter, tab. So it's the ability to do those sorts of things. And this includes segmenting and blending. So blending is if I say b, at, b, at, can the child figure out that's bat? That's blending. Segmenting is if I said to the child, tell me the sound you hear in bat. Could they say b, a, t? And those are vitally important to reading and encoding and decoding, to be able to have this underlying phonemic awareness where you understand and can hear the sounds of words. So little true confessions here. I have dyslexia and was not diagnosed until college. So I was a very late reader. And once I developed the ability to read, I loved it. So I devoured books, but I couldn't decode. If I came to a word I didn't know, I would just work around it until somebody told me what it said. Because I didn't hear the sounds in words, which is part of the disability of dyslexia. And I didn't have any ability to manipulate them. My working memory with phonemes was really bad, but I wanted to be a teacher. So I went to college. And as I said, in undergrad and graduate, we were taught to teach reading in a science of reading way, before we called it science of reading. And the professor for my literacy and teaching reading to children with disabilities class, I was an undergrad. It was a graduate class. There were 3 undergrads in the class. And I was a bit of a nerdy know-it-all, which surprises nobody who knows me. And so the professor asked for somebody to come up, and she wanted to demonstrate this LIPS assessment, this test that looks at how well you can hear and manipulate sounds and words. And I volunteered. I had no idea what she was asking me to do. The directions were fairly simple. I do them with my students all the time now. Put out a block for each sound that you hear. Now switch the blocks to match this word. I couldn't hear the sounds. I had no idea what she was talking about. She sent me back to my seat and called up somebody else. And I was like, how is that person doing this? And then she talked to me later and she said, I think you have dyslexia. I think you should be tested. And I think if you want to be a teacher, you need to get remediation, and I'll help you with that. So I did. I got tested. I got diagnosed as dyslexic. Dyslexic with excellent compensatory skills is how I was diagnosed. And I did get remediation. I sat and did the work of first graders, learning how to manipulate the sounds and hear the sounds. So I do understand the struggle for the kids who have a hard time with this. And that's one of the reasons I believe in the science of reading. I was taught my whole life in a whole language balanced literacy sort of approach, with some augmentation to that by my dad, who tried to help me study for spelling tests, which I was horrendous at, and a set of Catholic phonics books that somehow were in our house. But overall, I didn't really understand decoding and encoding until college and graduate school. So the next step, once you can hear the sounds, which is essential, is to understand the relationship between sounds and written letters, which are called graphemes. So you understand that a T spells T, and a J spells Ch, and A spells A or A. And then you have the ability to encode sounds and into letters and decode letters into sounds. So to spell and to read. Next up is comprehension. That's the ability to understand language, including written language. So usually when we talk about comprehension within the realm of literacy, we are talking about reading comprehension. Then there's fluency, the ability to read with speed, accuracy, automaticity, and expression. And finally, vocab, knowing the meaning of words. So the simple understanding, the simplest view of reading is language comprehension times decoding equals reading comprehension. Very simply, that's what it comes down to. Make it a little more complex, we can look at Scarborough's reading rope. So Scarborough's reading rope shows us the two real areas that lead to skilled reading. Language comprehension, remember, times decoding or word recognition. So in the top, we have all of these language skills, background knowledge. It's hard to read about the ocean and understand what they're talking about if you've never been to the ocean. It's hard to read about lots of things if you've never experienced them and have no knowledge of them. Vocabulary, if you don't know the words you're reading and what they mean, you're not going to be able to understand what you're reading. How language structure works. Verbal reasoning. So this is like inference and metaphor and just having a ability to understand more complex language. And then literacy knowledge, genres, print concepts, main character, setting, that sort of thing. So that's the language comprehension piece. And sometimes we do okay with some of these, or sometimes all of them, depending, with our students who use AAC. Our problem comes at the bottom. Word recognition. So that's phonological awareness. So syllables, phonemes, all of that. Decoding. So the alphabetic principle that each letter or groups of letter makes certain sound. And sight recognition of familiar words, which is kind of different than sight words. It's that if you've read a certain word 10, 12 times, you remember it and you have to sound it out every time. So there are many strands and they all get woven together to be a skilled reader, to have skilled reading. So how does that look in our classrooms for students who are AAC learners? So at the top, for background knowledge, we're reading books aloud, educational videos with support, direct instruction in all academic areas. I hate it when I go to a class to observe and they don't do social studies or science, because now you're missing all that background knowledge that's important for other things. If someone says it doesn't take an Einstein or makes a comment about Cleopatra, you have to have learned about it to know what they mean. Field trips, all of that is the background knowledge piece. Vocabulary, we need to be doing things like pre-teaching vocabulary and read aloud books. My classroom, we use vocabulary maps, defining words in conversations, which is something that parents naturally do. As you're speaking or reading aloud, stopping and saying what a word means. And direct instruction of vocabulary. And for AAC users, that means we want to use core words to define more complex words, just in case the complex word isn't there. One of the things I do with my class in our vocabulary maps is if we come to a word, last week, there was a word in a book we read, and the word was hideous. And a couple of kids knew it meant ugly, but most of them didn't. So we defined it as ugly because we could find ugly in our robust language systems. The word hideous was in no system. So the only kids who could then use hideous were the ones who could spell it And in our next class, which was a writing class, one of the kids did use the word hideous in her assignment, or the kids who could ask to have it added. So there's a lot of work to do with AAC users around vocabulary because their devices are limiting to them. Language structure. So AAC is a good vehicle for modeling language structure and a jumping off point for teaching grammar and word order and syntax. And then literacy knowledge. So teaching about things like main character, setting, plot points, comparing and contrasting, what was the problem in the story, what was the sequence of the story, all of those sorts of things. And then at the bottom, for our word recognition section, we should really be thinking about using a commercial structured literacy program such as UFLI, which I'm going to talk about, and adapting that to make it accessible. So just one more note, here are some things that are not literacy instruction if it's all you do. Listening comprehension is not literacy instruction if it's all you do. It can be used to develop background knowledge. It can be used just for fun, vocabulary, verbal reasoning, language knowledge. But having a kid listen to a book on reading A to Z or on EPIC is not literacy instruction in and of itself. I hate it when I ask about literacy at an IEP meeting for a client of mine, and they say, oh, we have reading A to Z. Well, that's nice, but it's not literacy instruction. Spelling, tracing, or writing their name repeatedly without purpose is not really literacy instruction. Identifying the letters of the alphabet, especially in the drill-based format without context, not really literacy instruction, especially, oh, I hate this so much. When I see a goal that says, well, identify the letters A through M, or we'll match capital A through M to lowercase a through M. It's not meaningful. It's not a context. The why kids get excited about letters is because they know they make up words, and that having language, having words, having writing and reading is power. That's what entices them to do the work. Identifying picture symbols and matching words to picture symbols, not literacy instruction. Sight words only, environmental print, community signs, safety signs. There might be value in doing some of these things, but they're not literacy instruction if that's all you're doing. Reading bubbled sight words where you put the red line around them, or word coffins, which is where you make you have boxes that align with the shape and size of the letters and you're supposed to fill them in. None of that on its own is literacy instruction. In fact, word coffin shouldn't be used ever at all. So just a word about comprehensive literacy for all. I'm a big fan, as most of us are. This was sort of the earth-changing book that came out for reading and writing and literacy for kids who use AAC. It was written by Karen Erickson and David Copenhaver. It's designed to teach the instruction of reading to individuals with complex communication needs. It divides students into emergent and conventional based on 4 simple questions. It offers strategies for emergent and conventional literacy learners. It discourages the use of synthetic phonics, which is what UFLI is, and replaces it with analytic phonics. It did grow out of the debunked balanced literacy in 4 blocks. That's where it started. Just to know that, not to condemn it or anything, but just to know where it started. But it has been a paradigm shifter in terms of just getting people to think we should do literacy at all. But I wonder what would happen if we shifted our thinking. So we have these 4 questions that are the questions that Erickson and Copenhaver asked to decide if a child is emergent or conventional. Do they know most of the letters most of the time? Do they engage by choice, not by rewards in shared reading? Do they have a means of communication and interaction? Do they understand that writing involves letters or words? If no, Copenhaver and Erickson say to do these things. Proceed with emergent literacy interventions like shared reading, predictable chart writing, alphabet and phonological awareness, independent writing with access to the alphabet, and developing the use of an AAC system. If no, they make some different recommendations, but my suggestion is, if no, we go with a conventional, systematic, explicit reading program that will teach all the skills that everybody else is learning when they learn how to read. And this should include things that Erickson and Copenhagen want us doing: independent reading, but I would also include decodable books matching where you are in the scope and sequence of your structured literacy program, advanced paired reading and group reading with comprehension and story elements, so that's some of the language knowledge parts. Phonics, decoding, encoding, segmenting, and blending, taught systematically, sequentially, and explicitly. Independent writing, full access to the alphabet, and of course, the use of a robust communication system that has spelling in it. I want to point out, I put this picture of this book here. This is Access to Phonics by Anne Sullivan. And it is a book about how do we give kids who have complex bodies and complex language needs and complex communication needs, how do we do the phonics with them? How do we adapt it? And it's you might already know, I felt like I already knew a lot of it, but it's a great resource to give to parents or people just starting on this journey. So just a quick caution. I've seen a lot of places get stuck on emerging reading activities. I have students who are definitely conventional readers. And then I talk to their school, and their school says, oh, we do predictable chart writing. That's for emergent readers. Or they say, oh, we read these classroom-made books. Oh, that's really for emergent readers. So be careful not to get stuck on emergent because you don't know how to do the next part. All right, so UFLI. So UFLI Foundations is the University of Florida Literacy Institute's foundational reading instruction book for K-3 or K-2, K-3. It is beautifully age appropriate for all ages, no babyish pictures, no sing-song, none of that. It's fine to use with older kids and even adults. So here's my student EJ. He's been with me one school year at this point. This is what his mom said, that UFLI has been a game changer. One of the great things here, let me see if I can share a different part of my screen and show you a text his mom sent me spontaneously. Sometimes I solicit quotes for presentations, but this is just something his mom sent me. So we did an assignment where the kids had to, writing with the alphabet, fill in this template to make an invitation to a habitat party. So we were learning about habitats. And you can see here how he wrote it. He said, "Dear Lizard," close on the spelling, "you are invited to a cactus desert party," very close on all the words, "at 9:30 on Saturday at the zoo from EJ." And this was the only part I couldn't guess, and it actually means peace out. And his mom texted that to me with a note saying, "A massive thank you for believing in our kids. We went from random letter strings to this in a year," more like 9 months. "And you and the other students are such an invaluable part of our circle. I'm so grateful." So for people who say our kids can't learn to read, I can introduce you to some kids who are learning to read and are doing really well with it. So let's look at what is UFLI, and I'm aware of time and where I'm going to go over. So I hope that that the AAC and the cloud people just go with the flow on that. So UFLI Foundations is a curriculum. It's an explicit, systematic program that teaches students the skills for proficient reading. It's the bottom part of the reading rope. It has a scope and sequence. If anybody ever wants to do a reading program with your child or wants you to adopt it in your classroom, you need to ask them, what is the scope and sequence of this program? What do we teach when, and what order are things taught? And if they can't tell you that, if that's not something free they give out in their advertisements, don't buy the program, because it means it won't be explicit and systematic. So the scope and sequence is very important. You have to be able to look at and understand where they start and how they build on each skill. It should carefully embed new learning with practice on skills already learned. You should know exactly what has been taught at any moment in time and what will be taught next. So I'm teaching UFLI to right now 3 different, one group and 2 different individuals, and I know exactly where we are in their progress. My large group is on lesson 17. One of my students is on lesson 35A or B, depending on her mood. And I have another student who is back at lesson 6. And I know exactly what that means because I've taught the program, or I could just look at the scope and sequence. UFLI is also perfect for special education. Other than the manual, all the materials are virtual and easy to adapt. So the lessons are in PowerPoint or Google Slides format, so you can adapt as needed. There's no babyish anything, and the curriculum spirals to prevent learning loss. So one of the things you're going to want is the manual. I think I have mine right here. This costs $70. It's probably the best $70 I ever spent. I actually had spent hundreds and hundreds of dollars on a different program, intending to use it. About a year ago, I bought it, intending to start it in September with my students. And I bought the UFLI manual just to check it out. I wasn't planning on going with it. But this was so much better for what I needed for my students that I ended up never using the expensive program and using UFLI. The only thing I will say is that the book falls apart fast. So my book is got pages that are falling out, and a lot of people take out the pages and put them into page protectors in a binder or something. So what's in this book? So it has essential background and information for teachers. It teaches you why you're going to teach things the way you're going to teach them and why that's important. Then it has 148 detailed scripted lesson plans. If you want to, you can read them straight from the book. Anybody can do it. You can give it to your paraprofessional or have her do it, him do it. Very structured, detailed thing. It has detailed descriptions of every step, and how to implement it. And I'll show you that in a minute. It has concept-based spelling assessments throughout the book to use for ongoing assessment. And again, it's really low cost, $70 compared to thousands for other programs. Now, granted, if you're buying, $470 manuals, that's a different story. But as an individual person, buying one $70 manual was really not a big deal. So what is included beyond the manual? You get all of these free resources. You get the slide decks of the lessons, and I'm going to go through one that I've adapted in a little bit. You get center activities, where clearly I forgot to add what that is. It's games and activities to do in centers. It's not that Venus is the second planet to the sun. My apologies. You get home support activities. It has, there are several UFLI apps for if you're virtual or if you're going to use a projector and a screen in your classroom. There are decodable passages for every lesson and an amazing list that matches each lesson to decodables from other companies. So you can, if you're on lesson 36, you can look at this and find, I happen to have HMN decodable books because I bought them in a yard sale. You can match it up to the lesson and use the right one. It also builds in visual supports like visual schedules into each lesson. There are a lot of YouTube videos that offer free training on how to teach UFLI. And there's lots of supports on social media. I'm only on Facebook. So I will tell you that UFLI has a learning community on Facebook, but I believe they're also on other social media platforms. So let's look at a few of these things. So this is an adapted slide deck of lesson 17. It's the lesson my students are on. So the slide deck includes what you see on this first page. And in most of the slides here, it includes, hold on. So it has the schedule for a 2-day lesson. You're supposed to be able to do a lesson in 2 days. It takes us 7-8 days to adapt it and do it at our pace. It has all of the slides that you'll need. Here's your built-in visual schedule. Tells you what activity you're on. This is an adapted slide where the kids put out, if I say b, a, t, b, a, t, what's the word? Bat. It has the visual drill. And then I've adapted it by having 4 per card here so that we can do some find the N, find the I, find the D, since my students aren't going to look at that and tell me it's an I. And it just goes through like that. It has everything you need for the whole lesson, all laid out for you. The writing things are animated, so students can see how the letters are written. And in a little bit, I'm going to go over how I adapt this. My computer's being a little slow. All right. There we go. So that's the slide deck. It has a blending board app that the teacher uses when teaching the blending board part of the lesson. Roll and read activities as part of the center activities. It has home practice handouts to send home to parents with things they can do at home. It has 2 different word work boards, but it also has all of these things available to print. It has all the instructions to make your own Velcro-based word work boards. All that's printable, flashcards for irregular words, sound wall stuff, everything you need, you just print off the website, all for free. And here's a photo of my students doing some word work. And because we're virtual, you can see that we are online. You can see that most of the kids are attending. One has his camera off, and this little guy is in Dubai, and it's like 3 a.m. for him. So he's more listening. But on this, the kids make their own words on their own word work boards at home, and then I model it along. Then sometimes I ask some questions. So I must have asked something about the U, and somebody circled it, and you can't see it, but what is under this picture of this child is the letter U. So that's just kind of us in action. Here's a roll and read game that we played virtually. The way we play is we had 2 teams, red and blue. Roll a dice, read a word, mark it down. The problem, somebody wins or loses once they're all full, and you lose a turn if you roll when the column is full. All right, so here's the lesson planning and implementation support. Look at how it has every step with how long it should take, what it looks like in your teacher manual, what materials the kids need to do it, and then how to teach it. So phonemic awareness, here's what it looks like in the book. Here's the symbol for the kids. They need their ears and their fingers to count with. And then it explains teacher segments or breaks apart a word into individual phonemes. The students chorally blend the phonemes, which of course we need to change for our students, to form a word. And segmenting, the teacher orally presents a word like shin, and the students repeat the word and chorally segment. And again, so we see right there the things we have to adapt. And it goes through for each part and tells you what a typical class will be doing. It's 2 pages long. That's the second page. You can also see here a little picture of individual manipulative letters that can be used for word work. So let's talk about how I adapt this for my users. First of all, we adjust the pace. So we go much more slowly. We spend about 40 minutes a day on it, which should be a whole lesson. But for us, it's usually 1 or 2 parts of a lesson. Another way we adapt is to have an array of choices and to make that array smaller for kids who need less choices visually or attentionally. I limit the amount of material that can be visually seen, so I block out some parts of the slides. I adapt the visual contrast of materials if needed. I don't have any students with CDI right now, but when I do, I may change the color scheme. When a word's being read and it happens to be a core or well-known word, we find the word in our AAC. So if we were reading the word put, I might pull out my low tech here and point to put. And then I might challenge the kids, let's have a race. Who can find put? And we'll find the word put as we just read or spell it. If a word is unlikely to be known, I define it for the students. And if I can, I act it out. So we had the word tug. So we read the word tug, and then I said, does anybody know what it means? And I think somebody said pull, and then we acted it out. Tug, 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 tug. Sob, we did similar. Sob. Woo! So it increases the vocab even as we're learning to read. I frequently ask simple comprehension questions, or I actually put them into the slide deck for connected text and decodable passages. Sometimes I add images to the words the first time I show them the word, and then later I can use those images to check for understanding. So I can have the word in 3 different images, find the one that matches, or I can have an image in 3 different words, find the one that matches. And I try not to underestimate the value of passive observation, of modeling. Something we all learned from being in AAC is that it's important. So I do have this slideshow that I made for my learning coaches, which are the parents and caregivers who attend my classes with their child. So what I have here is, and this is available online and part of the slideshow, if you want to just click on the link. I have these slides that say, okay, here's what the activity is, phonemic awareness. Here's what it looks like in the book, much like that handout we looked at from UFLI. So I state the purpose, and then I state how would a typical class do this? And then I say how I'm going to do it with the students. So when we do this, I will say the sounds and the kids will think the word for the first 2 to 3. And then the last one they will find on their talker or from a field of choices. Then I'll say the words and they will think the segments. And depending on the kid, put out either a counter or letters for each of the sounds. For the last one, they will hear the sounds and choose from a field of choices. We could do a field of choices for every single one, but this is supposed to take 2 minutes. And by adding just 1 or 2 as a field of choices, makes it already a 15-minute process. So we don't do it for everyone. Some of them are passive observation, or I ask them to do it in their head. Visual drill, same sort of thing. I say what a typical class does, and then I say how we do it, going right on through. Auditory drill, the blending drill, the new concept, the word work, irregular words, which are also called heart words, and then the connected text. So I have that out there for you to use. It's what I have my the parents of my students or caregivers, learning coaches, we call them. It's what I have them doing with their student at that time. Oh no. I accidentally clicked on the link again. Hold on. My apologies. Okay. Another thing people should know about is something called the nonverbal reading approach. If you Google it, you'll find some stuff about. There's a link here. So this is an approach to doing structured sequential reading with kids who are non-speaking. It teaches kids to use an internal voice for decoding. I call it the thinking voice. Use your thinking voice. It teaches you how to use a diagnostic distractor array as part of assessment. So you might give a kid a word and 4 choices, find the word, but the choices are deliberate. So there's one that starts with the same letter and sounds, ones that ends the same way, and one that just doesn't match at all. And the correct one, of course, and that way you can tell from the error what you need to work on. So it uses error analysis to inform teaching. It can be used with any program, so it works with UFLI, and there is some research behind it. Okay, so I want to show you the adapted slides for lesson 17, which is the lesson my students are currently on. Oh, that brought you to the folder full of adapted slides. I actually want just lesson 17. I just want to show you some of the ways I adapt. Let's just give it a minute to load up. All right, so this is something that I told you already is adapted. So the kids are using their own counters at home, and I use these as I model, you know, b, b, tub. We also do the hand motion, tub. We call that stretch and slide. And the kids, the minute I say stretch and slide, they know that they put up their hands and they know they're going to stretch the sounds and then slide them together. For the visual drill, I already showed you. We go through them individually, and then I name the letters and they find them here. The caregivers might hold up just 2 choices if it's a child who needs less choices for vision or attention reasons. Similarly, with the auditory drill, I say the sound d, and they go ahead and find it on this. This is the slide we did the other day, and I said f, and the kids were like, "What?" And but the top of my Zoom controls cut off the top of the T, and I thought it was an F, and the kids were like, "The heck, Miss Kate?" They were right. So the blending drill, we use the blending board that you get here. This is mainly a reading drill. I make words, I change the words, the kids read the words. A lot of them do it along with me, even though that's not required. And we sometimes find them in our talker if they're words that will be in our talker. You can see the visual schedule after each step. New concept, I literally read from the book on the new concept. So you read, this is the letter B, the B is a consonant, B makes the spells like in ball, the B can come at the beginning of a word, like in bat or big, it can come at the end of the word, like in cab or tub. When we make a B sound, we put our lips together, b, b. This is a capital B and a lowercase b. I'm obviously going much, much faster than I go in class. Watch me write, and I use the Zoom tool and I draw a B, and then we do it together. For the kids who can't physically write, I have the adults trace the letters on their bodies, which is a tip I got from Rick Hoyt. Rick Hoyt sadly just passed away, but he was the guy whose dad pushed him in the Boston Marathon for many years, and he actually had 2 master's degrees in education. And the way he learned his letters is his mom traced them on him. So I figure if it was good enough for Rick, then it's good enough for us. Some of our kids will actually write the letter of the day on their hands, or their parent will, and then their siblings will talk about it with them all day long. And then, so then watch me read. I read k, a, b, stretch it, cab, slide it together, cab. And then I have the next word. So I don't show them 2 at the same time. That's how the slide's supposed to look. But I do show them one and then the other to cut down on complexity. Then when we get to read together, I give them a minute to read it. And if anybody wants to say what it means or find it in their talker, they go ahead and do that. Some of the kids type it into the chat. All depends on their ability. Then I read it, sob, sob, sob. And then I show them a picture. Sob means cry. Look at it, it's crying, sob. And then I go on and do that for each one. Cub, cub. Here's a picture of a cub. And the kids read it first, and then I go over it with them. And for words like fib, which is, word they may not know, we will talk a lot about what it means. I might say, what's a word you might use in your talker that means fib? So it's like that all the way through all of these. Let's read together. For spelling, the kids use whatever alternate pencil they normally use, and we spell some words. Then it's the end of day one. You're supposed to have like a celebratory video here. My kids really could care less. I did at first, and they really don't care. They just, at the end of the lesson, they want to be done. So saying goodbye is enough of a celebration. So the next day, you do a review of the new concept. And then we do the read together. This time I have the word and a picture. It's the same picture that we did yesterday. So they should be able to find it based on reading. And then this one, find the picture, match the word. And then we do our word work. And the kids mostly use magnetic letters for that. Then we do our irregular word. So we'll go through one at a time, and I'll say them, and the kids will find them in their talkers. But then we go to these, find to, find do. And then we learn our new heart word. We might watch a heart word video from really great reading. And then we get to the connected text. Again, I cover up parts of it. So we read the first. Actually, what I say to them is I say, read this. Parents only help for attention and focus. And then when I see everybody's done reading it, I uncover the next part and I say, all right, which one goes with the sentence? And they're usually right. Maybe back long time, when we first started, they weren't, but they are now. Read the sentence will help you if you need it for attention and then if anybody has a hard time with it, or if a lot of kids have a hard time with it, I'll go through and decode each word. I'll say the, we know the is a heart word. Pup. Oh, we read that word yesterday. Pup. Is a heart word. Is. In. We can decode that one. In. The pup is in the. That's another heart word. The pup is in the tub. Tub. Where is the tub? Which shows a pup in a tub. And similarly, it goes through for all of those. And then for the decodable text, very similar story, but this time we just go through a line at a time. And I just ask the parents just to help for attention. And then we have some comprehension questions. Where is everybody? And they can circle on the screen, or their parents write it on a whiteboard and they circle it there, or sometimes they type the answers into the chat. And so there's, a few very simple questions after each section. And, I make sure that whatever words I use in the questions are decodable based on what we've already learned. And that is it for the adapted slideshow. And like I said, I put this in a folder for anybody who wants to use. So if you start UFLI and you get to lesson 16, 17, I've made these already. You can borrow them and adapt as you need to. So I hope that was great, even though it was longer than it was supposed to be. If you have any questions, my name is Kate. My email is kate@aacvoices.org. I also moderate the AAC through Motivate, Model, Move Out of the Way Facebook group, and a group called Ellis for Literacy, which is about using systematic phonics to teach kids with complex communication needs to read. So thank you all for coming today. I really appreciate it. And I'm sorry I went over. Have a great day. Bye.